Welcome to Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast, the ultimate resource for business leaders that need a boost in revenue and business growth. I'm your host, Kerry Curran. With over 20 years of marketing agency experience driving client business growth, I now run RBMA, Revenue-Based Marketing Advisors, where we help businesses like yours effectively scale revenue growth. Visit Revenue-Based Marketing or connect with me on LinkedIn. This episode is From Startup to Scale Up, Strategic Road Mapping for Revenue Growth with Jennifer Peters, the Director of D2C, Martech, and Digital Compliance at OLLY, the wellness vitamin and supplement company. In this episode, Jennifer and I discuss essential strategies for future-proofing startups, covering key topics from building effective roadmaps to managing customer subscriptions for long-term growth. Jennifer also shares her insights on scaling OLLY from a startup to a Unilever brand, emphasizing the crucial role of leadership, tech infrastructure, and customer-centric decision-making. This episode is filled with valuable takeaways for executives focused on driving revenue growth and sustainability. So welcome, Jennifer. So excited to have you here today. Please introduce yourself and share a bit about your background and experience.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Jennifer. I'm the Director of D2C, Martech, and Digital Compliance at OLLY, the gummy vitamin company, supplement company. We are a Unilever brand. I've been there about 3.5 years. It is a wonderful place to work, and we sell a product that just is fun every day, so that makes it a lot easier. I came from a lot of different places. The agency, I've been at an agency, done a lot of brand work, worked on several different kinds of brands, freelanced with a lot of different kinds of brands. And when I was at the agency, I was an e-commerce platform architect. So I built stores for brands. So I've kind of like seen all the elements, the marketing, the technical, the sales piece, like all of that in my life. And I think it makes my job a lot easier.
Yeah, and definitely it's the e-commerce landscape, the evolution, just even in the past 10 years has been so rapid. So I know I've loved watching it and kind of being a part of it on the marketing and advertising side. And obviously the back end part of it is so important as well. Great. And so you've got tons of experience and have mastered a lot of different business challenges in the e-com space. And I know one of the topics that you're very knowledgeable on is kind of how to set yourself up, how companies can future-proof themselves for the different stages of scaling and growth. So love to kind of have you take it away and share a bit of your POV on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple different examples, but I'm going to start with OLLY because we were a startup. We were founded in 2015 in San Francisco as a startup, same founder as Method, OLLY, kind of like chronic entrepreneur. And it was very startup culture. It was, it's very exciting when you're at a startup that's doing well. We were acquired by Unilever in 2019, which is not a lot of time. I would just like to say that is not a lot of time. And then obviously COVID happened. So there was kind of a couple of years of that. But basically it's you often come in, especially like in the role that I'm in, you come in midstream. Like you're never there at the beginning and build everything from the ground up yourself, where you know how everything works and why decisions were made. Like that is pretty unrealistic. Usually you come in and you're like, what is this? How did it get this way? Why was this decision made this way? Who did that? What were you thinking? And then, there's always kind of this research piece where you try to have to understand why things happen the way they did. Sometimes there's very good reasons for that. Sometimes there's a perspective that was missing in the conversation where that was decided. So at OLLY, for sure, it was one of those situations where I came in very lucky to have the same developer that built the store. Like I think for that every day. I mean, it's amazing because he really does know like where all the digital bodies are buried. So that's an amazing advantage, but usually you do not have that. Usually you're kind of trying to figure that out on your own. And I was the first person to run D2C. So it was the first headcount that was like specifically assigned to that role and running like the OLLY.com business.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell. So there were a lot of things where, we were making decisions for 6 months from now. We were not making decisions from a year, 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really hard at that stage too, because you want to move fast. You want to be agile. You maybe don't have the time to do as much due diligence as you would, in a more established brand. And sometimes there's, the knowledge and experience just isn't there on your team. In this case, there was no headcount assigned to it. It was kind of just like swept under marketing in a vague way. But there were a lot of things that you could tell were startup decisions that were not going to scale. Right. And the example I always use that I think is one of the most important ones, especially in the supplement space, is subscriptions. There's two things that are terrible in digital, and that's moving subscriptions and migrating ESPs. Like nobody wants to do either of those things. Yeah. I think subscriptions is the worst because it is very high risk. You're moving these tokenized credit card numbers and PII and kind of all this stuff and hoping you don't lose it. So that is one of the things I always like when I talk to other companies that are in any sort of replenishable business, not even just supplements. For me, if you're going to go hard and you're going to invest in something that is a 5-year plan, subscriptions are the place to do it. Like go find the partner that you want to be with for 5 years. Like if you think, let's try this, don't do that. Just wait. Because that's one that's really hard to back out of. And with us, we had kind of a structure built around our subscriptions that was driven by operations and shipping costs instead of by customer needs and customer wants. And that I think is another thing that you can always use as a course corrector in a startup or a maturing brand is to think about, what would our customer like the most? Because a lot of times those decisions don't get made with that in mind.
Right. Well, and it's because you see that a lot with any product development, especially when in the startup, like the founders had a vision, they saw it and what a great idea. But to your point, it's like the product led or operations led, you're going to miss what's going to resonate with your customers. And then to your point of there's so much data and infrastructure that's needs to move with it. I wanted to, you brought up a really good point of kind of when you came into OLLY, it wasn't that there were, you came in and there's a lot of things that needed to be changed right away. Yes. And I know you'll probably get to this later as well, but startups and as they grow, like it's different skill sets at different stages, right? So to your point, like the team that your founders had around when they launched, kind of the brand outgrew the skill set of those people. And then they needed to kind of graduate to more elevated expertise like yourself. Is there an opportunity for brands, startups to start with? And you're kind of talking about that with the tech partner and infrastructure, but from a talent perspective as well, like, is it possible or recommended that founders at this very early stages are looking for more advanced talent, or does it work to start with kind of who they have and then graduate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is purely my opinion. I'm not sure that there is a right answer to that. I think that there are people who have a heart for startups and love the startup world. Like they thrive in that world. And you see them go from startup to startup to startup. And there's a reason for that. That's what they like. That's what drives them. That's what makes them happy. Yeah. When you kind of move out of that phase as your brand into this like awkward teenage phase is what I usually call it. There usually is like self-correcting because I think they're like, this is not what I want to do. Like, I don't want to sit here and build processes that are, going to get us from here to there. Like, this is not what's in my heart. Like, I want to go do something that's, more in line with what I love. So I think there's part of that. And we need those people who love startups. I think they're so critical to getting things off the ground because like, I do not have the heart for getting things off the ground. Like, I don't want that. I am not interested. I did spend some time at an IoT startup here in San Francisco. And they were kind of like on that cusp of boom, like, either being acquired or getting much bigger. And, there's definitely a feeling, I think, in San Francisco in general that like you might have a CEO that is, like you said, he's like brilliant. He made this product that he lives for and loves. He might not be the best business manager in the world. So I think there's some of that too, where you just think like, it's okay to bring in people. It's okay if you're a CEO in a startup and you're just like, I'm a product person. I love my product. I want to work on that. Bring in someone who is a general manager who can manage the business. It doesn't have to be you, but sometimes there's ego involved. And I think there is a lot of reluctance to kind of let go and focus on the things that you are good at. If it's product development, if it's marketing, if it's branding or whatever it is. Those are decisions I think that can kind of make or break a startup in those early years. Like how much is that CEO willing to let go and let the other people manage, let them be experts in their space?
Yeah, no, that definitely. And it's such a rush for funding and capital or acquisition.
Constant cycle of fundraising. Yes.
It's almost more of a short-term focus anyway versus the longer-term plan.
And I think that's a great point, because a lot of times the goal is to get to the next fundraising round and not to be profitable. Not to make customers happy. And so I think that, again, if you don't have people specializing in those kinds of roles, you're going to lose sight of that. And that's going to hurt you eventually.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting. And it's probably a much bigger concept and topic of how to move through that growth phase without disruption. But But in this scenario, you come in, you've got a startup and you're ready to scale it. So talk us through some of the right steps that any company should be considering for future proofing.
So road mapping is critical. And that, there's road mapping in a very technical way, in like a web development kind of way. And there's road mapping in just a very broad kind of idea sort of way. And both are really important. Thinking down the road of a year from now, where do I expect to be, really determines everything you do in between now and then. So even if you're not in a technical environment, it's still really important to plan those things. And in a technical environment, it's more like, at what point in my revenue journey am I going to bring in this new tool? Like when does my revenue justify the addition of, I don't know, say you wanted to go all in on, they don't really work that way anymore. I was going to say you want to go all in on Salesforce marketing or whatever, but that's not a great example. But like, when do I want to really launch into like a sophisticated CRM programs? Like when my journey is going to become a focus? When does that make sense? When do I have enough customers in my database to make that make sense? Yeah. You can build journeys all day long, but if there's like 10 customers in the pipeline, it's not going to be great.
But like, when do we think CRM?
Absolutely. Like, that's sad.
Echoes.
But like, at what point do you feel like when we hit this amount of revenue, do we bring in a CDP so we can manage our data better and safer? There's so many things that I think like you have to plan those milestones in advance, even if they're not technical. They don't have to be technical, but they have to be a plan. Of when we get here, we do this. And fulfillment is another place that is a critical in scaling, because if your fulfillment partner is doing great with what you're doing now and doesn't have the capabilities to scale to the $10 million business you want to be in 5 years, moving warehouses is terrible. Like, nobody wants to do that. Yeah. So I think asking those good questions of vendors up front too, like what are your full capabilities? Not just, can you accommodate me now, but can you accommodate me as my business grows and scales? Yeah. I think those are really, really important questions. And I mean, I can say since I've been at OLLY, we have moved warehouses, we have moved CRMs, we have moved subscriptions, and they're all full of learning, you always learn a lot when you do it. But it's easier to not have to do that if you can avoid it.
This episode of Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast, is brought to you by Kriglu. Want to boost customer acquisition while saving time and money? Meet Kriglu, an AI-powered omnichannel bid management platform designed to optimize your ad spend. Quigloo intelligently adjusts bids across channels, ensuring your ads reach the right audience at the lowest cost. Plus, with its automation, you'll free up valuable time to focus on your business. The result? Efficient, cost-effective growth, all while maximizing your marketing budget. Ready to scale smarter and faster? Visit Crigloo.com, CRIGLOO.com, and start saving today. Great. And so you talked about kind of planning. So you've the setting up the roadmap for the physical and technical infrastructure. And then as you're thinking about where do you want to be in the next year what are some of the kind of the next steps?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think it depends on what kind of business you're in, but a lot of it starts with the product too. And I think that is another thing that can easily happen in startups. When you have 10 people, 15 people, 20 people working at a company, everybody knows everything all of the time. And it's really nice. It's really nice. Like you feel like you have a full understanding of like what the product people are working on and what the sales people need. And, all of those things, you have a lot of visibility into that. As you grow, I think there's a real tendency to start siloing off. And then suddenly you don't have any visibility. And then there's no infrastructure to support communication cross-functionally.
Right.
And so then, the silos just get worse. They never get better unless you do something. But I think that in the startup culture, there's such like here's this tool. I'm going to use my company credit card and sign up for it really quick because I need this thing. Well, somebody else might have signed up for that same thing. And now you're paying for it twice instead of getting an enterprise account. And that has happened several places where I've worked. We're like, how many Canva accounts do we have here?
Right.
So I think there's, that communication piece is really important. Even if the infrastructure is not there, you don't want to be paying for something twice or having tools that do the same thing, but there are different tools.
Right.
So if your sales team is using a different email system than your marketing team, like, why are you doing that? That's expensive. You're paying for it twice. So I think consolidating tools is really important, but I think it all comes back to kind of that cross-functional communication. And I think as leaders, it's our job to facilitate that. It's our job to make sure that is happening and it's happening correctly. Otherwise, I think that reflects directly on our leadership.
Yeah. And so you talked a bit about leadership and culture and kind of building the team out. And so how do you approach kind of when to hire the right people or know when it's time to, your business is scaling, now it's time to scale the team. Where do I look? How do I plan for that?
Oh my gosh, that is, I think, I don't know that there's a right answer to that. But I think it definitely starts at the top in relinquishing some of that control as a CEO or assuming you're a CEO founder or even just a CEO. I think hiring people that you trust to do their jobs is the best thing you can do. And that trickles down because then those people will hire people that they can trust to do their jobs. And that, I think that's how it works in a successful brand. But it really does have to start at the top. And I think it's really a lot easier when that leadership person at the top of the pyramid demonstrates that in a transparent and honest way. Our CEO at OLLY she is totally incredible. And she is one of the most transparent people I've ever seen in my life. And all of that is part of our culture because of who she is. All of that is in our culture. So I think that it starts at home. It starts in the C-suite and in the CEO's office of who do we want to be? How do I want people to feel? How do I empower the people that directly report to me so that they then empower the people that directly report to them? And then you're also hiring people in as you're adding headcount. You're trusting people to say, hey, we need headcount. I think that can be a thing too, where you're just like, I need help, but you can't really necessarily quantify what you need help with, writing a job description and the cost of bringing on that headcount. Again, that kind of goes back to that planning and road mapping. If you're running an e-commerce business, at what point do you bring in somebody to just do retention? What point do you bring in someone just to be like a website manager? So that, that the other person can be more strategic. I think it's different for different brands, but my feeling is if you are hiring people from the top down that you trust to make good decisions and that are experts in their area, then it will determine itself. Like those things will happen in the right order. Probably not perfect. And like, no, none of us are perfect, but I think you have a much better chance when you have like empowered leaders from the top down making
Yeah.
good choices for the business as a whole and not just for their department.
Yes. Yeah.
And that again, that comes from the top too.
Yeah. One of the examples you gave was about kind of brainstorming for
Mm-hmm.
kind of design thinking and um, what, how to expand your product from either marketing or product actual vitamins, different supplements. So talk a bit about how that process has been really valuable and how it's helped your teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I was the director of marketing and e-commerce for 7 years at a Christian church supply company in Nashville. And this is in part of our business was a publishing house as well. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of creative people, a lot of creative stuff happening there. It wasn't just kind of like just transactional. And we did so many design thinking workshops, and I didn't realize at the time because everyone around me was kind of the same. We all were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I never realized until recently how much that drove the way I think about solving problems. And I'm lucky to have had that opportunity to kind of learn in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I think at OLLY where it's well, at any startup probably that's evolving, always starting with the customer first is not necessarily
Yeah.
part of your culture.
Right.
And it's like the customer first, then you work backward always. Like it
Mm-hmm.
always starts with the customer. And, I mean, there are times like one of the brands I worked with and in the operations department, you would ask their director of ops, like, who's your customer? And they're like, Walmart. And they're like, no, it's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
But I think humanizing the customer throughout your business and in all departments
Mm-hmm.
is really, that is a cultural thing for sure. But like at the end of the day, your goal is to make a customer happy, a
Yeah.
person, like an individual person, and you're supposed to be making their life better. And then
Mm-hmm.
thinking backwards on how do we do that? But when
Right.
you let other things drive decision making, like operations or shipping cost, or you want to hit a certain price point maybe on a product,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not how customers would want that. Like anytime you're letting all those other things drive decision making, you're going to eventually have to go back and clean that up because it's
Yeah.
always going to end up being a problem. But if you
Yeah.
start with the customer first and work
Mm-hmm.
backwards, you're pretty much always going to win.
Yeah. Well, right. Because you need the customer to be happy to
Mm-hmm.
sell more product, to keep the company growing, to have that
Absolutely.
money to reinvest. So it really ties down to if you're going to grow revenue, you need to focus on who's actually spending the money. So
Absolutely.
yeah, no, I love that. And no, this has been great. So what would your what would your top recommendation be to a startup today of kind of the things they need to make sure they're keeping in mind?
I would say have a 1 year plan, have a 2 year plan, have a 3 year plan, maybe go up to 5 years, and really dream big on what you
Mm-hmm.
think your volume is going to look like and what you think your evolution will look like, because it can be bigger. It can be bigger than you think it can be. And if you only prepared for small, then you're going to be really challenged.
Yeah.
If you are in the CPG space, food, bev, alcohol, anything replenishable, invest heavily in subscription. One of the brands I worked on at the agency was a very specialty potato chip company.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember pitching subscriptions to them and then being like, no one's going to subscribe to chips. And I was like, I guarantee you they will. And
Yeah.
they have like one of the biggest subscription programs
Yeah.
of any brand I worked on. So like never underestimate the power of subscriptions if your product is consumable.
Yeah.
It helps you forecast. It helps you plan inventory. It helps you obviously retain customers. Those customers are much higher LTV customers than anyone else you're going to acquire. So I think that is the place, if you're in consumables, to really, really invest. The other thing I would strongly emphasize is absolutely have an email program. Like
Yes.
just having a website is
Mm-hmm.
not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to do
Yeah.
SMS when you're starting out, but
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of brands lately with a website and doing paid and kind of doing like paid acquisition work, but they
Mm-hmm.
don't have an email program. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a slam dunk. Like that's
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
There's nothing difficult there at all. So if you're willing to go out and spend money on paid,
Yeah.
but not invest in any sort of retention, like that's not great.
Yeah.
But there is a balance too of, I think as your startup grows, of balancing kind of the acquisition and retention efforts and where you're spending your time and resources. And I feel like for different brands and different kinds of brands, there is a balance there's like a ratio for everyone.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
I like mine to be 30 returning, 70 new. Like that's kind of where I'm comfortable. But it depends on the brand. If you're selling a product that people don't have to replace, it's going to be different, obviously. But yeah, those are the places I would say, like definitely roadmap and plan. And then absolutely stay focused on the customer always, and balance your resources and invest in email. It's easy. Email's easy.
Yeah. You know what? You're so right. And I agree. And I think we're seeing, and this is our next podcast episode topic, Jennifer, will be email and retention, because I think it's
beautiful,
so important, and you probably know actual data, but they always say it's harder. It costs more to acquire a new customer than
100%.
one, but yet like what percentage of marketing teams are focused on retention. So that will be our teaser for when I can get you scheduled again, because this was super helpful. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. And we will definitely be talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Great. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast. For more episodes and to learn how you can boost your revenue, go to revenuebasedmarketing.com. Be sure to subscribe to Revenue Boost, a marketing podcast, so you don't miss more strategies to grow your business.